clinic watching over the pups and waiting for news. The smaller pup, which he had started calling Shadow, showed slow but steady improvement. Its eyes opened on the second day, revealing the same golden amber as its brothers. When it saw Scout curled up beside Chief, it made a soft whining sound that might have been recognition. The reunion between the brothers was something Thomas would never forget. Scout had been resting with Chief when Shadow's eyes fluttered open for the first time. The healthier pup's head came up immediately, ears forward, body tense with attention. For a long moment, the two brothers simply looked at each other across the small examination room. Then Scout crossed the distance between them in 3 quick bounds. He pressed his nose against Shadow's face, sniffing frantically, as if confirming that his brother was really alive, really awake, really still there. Shadow's tail, which had been motionless for days, gave a single weak wag. Elena, who had been checking the 4 lines, stepped back to give them space. She was crying. Thomas realized this hardened veterinarian who had seen life and death 1,000 times was crying at the sight of 2 wolf pups recognizing each other. Thomas was crying too, but he did not care. For the next 2 days, Scout refused to leave Shadow's side. He slept curled around his brother, ate his meals next to Shadow's bed, and growled at anyone who approached too quickly. The only exception was Chief, who was allowed to lie nearby and keep watch. Dr. Chen visited twice more, documenting the pup's progress and growing increasingly impressed by their condition. Whatever you are doing, it is working, she told Thomas on the second visit. These pups have a strong will to live. They learned it from their brother, Thomas said, watching Scout keep his endless vigil beside Shadow's bed. On the 3rd day, Jenny called. I found a solution, she said without preamble, but you're going to have to do something first. Anything. You're going to have to drive here and tell their story in person to our board, to our donors, to anyone who will listen. You're going to have to make them understand why these 2 brothers need to stay together. Thomas looked across the room at Scout and Shadow, now curled together on a blanket with Chief watching over them like a guardian angel. I can do that, he said. Good. And Uncle Thomas, bring the dog to drive from Darby to the Second Chance Sanctuary in Wyoming. Took 8 hours. Thomas made it in 7. He pushed the patrol car as fast as he dared, carrying in his back seat 2 wolf pups, 1 German shepherd, and a story that refused to be silenced. The sanctuary was smaller than he expected, nestled in a valley, surrounded by mountains that still held the last stubborn patches of winter snow. Jenny met him at the gate, her face a mixture of anxiety and hope. The board is assembled, she said. They are waiting for you. What do I need to say? Jenny looked at the pups in the back seat, at Chief's protective posture, at the way Scout's golden eyes tracked her every movement. Tell them the truth, she said. Tell them about the road and the waiting and the days that must have felt like years. Tell them what it means to refuse to give up on family. Thomas walked into the sanctuary's small meeting room, feeling more nervous than he had during any moment of his 28 years in law enforcement. A dozen faces looked back at him, some skeptical, some curious, all waiting to be convinced. The room was modest, with wood-paneled walls covered in photographs of wolf success stories. Thomas realized animals that had been saved by this organization, given second chances when no one else would help. He hoped Scout and Shadow would one day be among those photographs. He cleared his throat and looked around the room. The board members were a mix of ages and backgrounds. An older woman with silver hair who carried herself with quiet authority, a young man with tattoos and a passionate look in his eyes, a middle-aged couple who held hands under the table. These were people who cared. Thomas realized people who had dedicated their lives to something bigger than themselves. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He told them about the frozen road and the small black shape that refused to move. He told them about Chief's strange behavior, the whining that had never happened before. He told them about following the pup through the forest, about the shelter and the dying brother and the mother they had found 50 yards away. He told them about 5 days of walking to a road where no one ever stopped, 5 days of hope that refused to die, 5 days of keeping a brother alive through sheer force of will. He described the way Scout had stood on his hind legs beside the examination table, singing to his unconscious brother. He described the moment Shadow's eyes had opened and the 2 pups had recognized each other. He described Chief's unwavering protection, as if the old German shepherd had decided these wolves were his responsibility. The room was silent. Every eye was fixed on Thomas, and he could see that his words were having an effect. Some board members had tears in their eyes, others were leaning forward, completely absorbed in the story. And then he told them about Kevin. He had not planned to share that part. He had never spoken about Kevin. Anyone had buried that grief so deep that he thought it could never surface, but standing in that room surrounded by people who dedicated their lives to saving animals that others had given up on, the words came pouring out. He told them about the phone call he never returned, about the 2 weeks of silence, about the heart attack that killed his brother because no one was there to help. I spent 3 years carrying that guilt, Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. 3 years believing that I had failed the most. Table and taking notes on a small tablet. She spent several minutes observing Scout, and Chief, her eyebrows rising slightly at the unusual bond between the German Shepherd and the wolf pup. This is remarkable, she said finally. You said the healthy pup waited on the road for 5 days. That is what the evidence suggests. The mother had been dead for at least that long. Dr. Chun nodded slowly. Wolf pups typically stay with their mothers until they are about 6 months old. At 3 months, these two should not have been able to survive on their own at all. The fact that one of them had the intelligence and determination to seek human help is extremely unusual. What happens to them now? Thomas asked. Dr. Chun was quiet for a moment. According to standard protocol, they should be transported to a wildlife rehabilitation facility where they can be assessed for release back into the wild. But I have to be honest with you, Officer Reed, the chances of successful release are very low. Why? These pups have been orphaned at a critical developmental stage. They have already formed an attachment to humans, and to your dog, releasing them into the wild would likely result in their deaths. They do not have the skills to survive, and they do not have a pack to teach them. So what is the alternative? Dr. Chin sighed. The alternative is permanent captivity. There are several sanctuaries that accept wolves that cannot be released. The pups would be cared for, but they would never be truly wild again, and would they stay together? That is where it gets complicated. Most sanctuaries are over capacity. Finding one that can take 2 wolves at the same time is extremely difficult. The most likely scenario is that they would be separated and placed in different facilities. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. He thought about Scout waiting on that road. Every morning, he thought about the way the pup had refused to leave its brother's side. He thought about the 5 days of hope and determination that had led to this moment. That is not acceptable, he said quietly. Dr. Chun looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and professional detachment. I understand your feelings, but the reality is that there are limited resources and many animals in need. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. There has to be another way. If you can find a sanctuary that will take both pups and keep them together, I will do everything in my power to make it happen. But I have to warn you, Officer Reed, that kind of placement is extremely rare. Thomas nodded slowly. He did not have a plan. He did not have any idea how he was going to solve this problem. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not going to let these brothers be separated, not after everything they had been through, not after everything Scout had done, not after the lesson that small black pup had taught him about what it meant to never give up on family. The weight of the task ahead settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. 72 hours, that was all the time. He had to find a sanctuary willing to take 2 wolves, keep them together, and provide them with a permanent home in a system that was already overcrowded and underfunded. The odds were not in his favor. But then Thomas looked at Scout, and he remembered the road. He remembered the frozen morning and the small black shape that refused to move. He remembered the golden eyes that had looked at him with such determination, such hope, such absolute refusal to accept defeat. If that pup could wait for 5 days on a frozen road, Thomas could make some phone calls. Dr. Chun left with a promise to delay the official transport for 72 hours, citing the medical fragility of the smaller pup. It was not much time, but it was something. After she was gone, Thomas sat back down on the couch, Chief at his feet, and Scout curled against his leg. The clinic was quiet now. The only sounds, the soft beeping of the monitor and the gentle breathing of the pup on the table outside. Darkness had fallen, completely wrapping the small building in a cocoon of night. Scout shifted closer to Thomas, pressing his warm body against the man's leg. The pup looked up at him with those golden eyes, and Thomas could have sworn he saw something like hope in their depths, something like trust. It occurred to Thomas that this small creature had no reason to trust humans. His mother was dead, his brother was dying, and strangers had taken them from the only home they had ever known. By all rights, Scout should have been terrified, defensive, aggressive. Instead, he was leaning against Thomas's leg like they had known each other for years. I'm going to figure this out, Thomas whispered. I promise. Scout put his head on Thomas's knee and close his eyes, his small body, relax the tension of the long day. Finally releasing from his muscles, he was still just a pup. Thomas realized, still just a baby who needed comfort and safety, and someone to tell him that everything was going to be okay. Thomas reached down and gently stroked the soft black fur. Scout made a small sound of contentment, something between a sigh and a whimper. And for the first time since Kevin died, Thomas felt like he might actually be able to keep a promise. The next morning, Thomas made a phone call he had been dreading. Jenny Morrison answered on the third ring. Her voice was cautious when she recognized his number. Uncle Thomas, is everything okay? Jenny was not actually his niece, but she had called him that since she was 6 years old. She was the daughter of his former partner, Bill Morrison, and Thomas had watched her grow from a curious child into a dedicated wildlife biologist. She now worked at a small wolf sanctuary in Wyoming called Second Chance, a facility that specialized in wolves that could not survive in the wild. I need a favor, Thomas said, a big one. He told her everything: the road, the waiting, the shelter in the forest, the dying pup, the determination of Scout to save his brother. He told her about Elena's heroic efforts and Dr. Chin's deadline. He told her about the 72 hours he had left before the department would separate the brothers forever. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Uncle Thomas, Jenny said, finally, I wish I could help, but Second Chance is at capacity. We have not had an open enclosure in over 2 years. I know it is a lot to ask. It is not just about space. Taking in 2 wolves requires food, medical care, specialized staff. Our budget is stretched thin as it is. Thomas felt his hope beginning to crumble. He had known this was a long shot, but hearing the reality spoken out loud made it feel final. I understand, he said quietly. I had to try. Wait. Jenny's voice had changed, become more thoughtful. Tell me again about the healthy pup, the one that waited on the road. Thomas described Scout in as much detail as he could. The golden eyes that seemed to see straight through you, the intelligence that defied explanation, the determination that had kept him walking to that road every morning for 5 days. And you said your German shepherd bonded with them? Jenny asked. From the first moment, Chief has not left their side. It is like he decided they were his responsibility. Another long silence. Then Jenny said something that made Thomas's heart skip. I'm going to make some calls. Do not give up. Yet the next 2 days were agony. Thomas stayed at Elena's. Protocol would have let this pup die, Thomas said flatly. Another long pause. I am sending a team from the department. They will be there first thing tomorrow morning to assess the situation and take custody of the animals. Tomorrow morning, Thomas repeated. Can you make it this afternoon? The department is not a pizza delivery service, Red. They will be there when they get there. And Red, consider yourself on administrative leave until we sort out this mess. Turn in your badge and weapon when you get back to the station. The line went dead. Thomas stared at his phone for a moment, then pocketed it and turned back to watch Elena work. She had started the 4 and was carefully monitoring the pup's vital signs on a small portable machine. Bad news, she asked without looking up. Administrative leave. The department will be here tomorrow morning to take the pups. Elena's hands paused briefly, then continued their work. Tomorrow morning. This one will not be stable enough to transport by tomorrow morning. If they try to move it too soon, the stress could kill it. Then we need to make sure it is stable enough. Thomas said the next 6 hours were some of the longest of Thomas's life. Elena worked tirelessly, adjusting the 4 drip, monitoring vital signs, treating the various infections that had begun to take hold in the pup's weakened body. Thomas stayed in the corner with Chief and the healthier pup, watching and waiting and trying not to think about what would happen when the department arrived. During those long hours, Thomas found himself studying the healthier pup with a growing sense of wonder. The small wolf had positioned itself in a spot where it could see both its sibling on the table and the door to the outside world. Its golden eyes moved, constantly tracking Elena's movements, watching the machines that beeped and hummed, returning again and again to its brother's still form. There was an intelligence in those eyes that Thomas had rarely seen in any animal, including the dozens of police dogs he had trained over his career. This was not simple instinct or learned behavior. This was something deeper, something that bordered on understanding. At one point, Elena needed to adjust the pup's position on the table. The moment she touched the small body, the healthier pup let out a low warning growl. It was not aggressive, not truly threatening, but it was unmistakable in its message. Be careful with my brother. Elena paused and looked at the pup in the corner. It is okay, she said softly. I am trying to help. The pup held her gaze for a long moment, Then the growl faded. It settled back on its haunches, but its eyes never left Elena's hand. He understands, Thomas said quietly. He knows you are helping. Elena shook her head in disbelief. In 15 years of veterinary medicine, I have never seen anything like this level of awareness, this protective instinct in a pup. So young, it should not be possible, but it was possible. Thomas was watching it happen. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas noticed something else. Remarkable Chief had not moved from his position near the healthier pup for more than a few seconds at a time. The German Shepherd, who was trained to follow commands without hesitation, had apparently decided that his current assignment was to guard these wolves, and nothing, not even a direct order from Thomas, was going to change his mind. At one point, Thomas tried to call Chief to his side. The dog looked at him, then looked at the wolf pup beside him, then deliberately lay back down. It was the first time in 8 years the Chief had refused a command Thomas should have been concerned. A canine unit dog that did not follow orders was a liability, but looking at the way Chief had positioned his body to provide warmth and comfort to the frightened pup, Thomas felt only pride. You are a good boy, he said softly. You are doing exactly what you should be doing. Chief's tail wagged once, but he did not move from his post. Sometime in the afternoon, the healthier pup did something unexpected. It walked away from Chief and crossed the room to where its sibling lay on the table. It stood on its hind legs, front paws against the edge of the table, and began to make a soft whining sound. Thomas started to move it away, worried about disturbing Elena's work, but she stopped him. Let it stay, she said. I have seen animals respond to the presence of their family. It might actually help. The pup stayed there for hours, maintaining its vigil beside the table. Occasionally it would make that soft whining sound, and occasionally the pup on the table would twitch in response, as if it could hear its brother. Even in the depths of its unconsciousness, Thomas watched this display of devotion with a lump in his throat. He thought about all the times Kevin had called him, wanting to talk, needing connection, and he thought about all the times he had been too busy, too distracted, too focused on his own life to answer this wolf pup, this small creature who could not speak or reason or plan for the future. Understood something that Thomas had spent 52 years failing to grasp. Being there was not about convenience. It was not about timing or schedules or priorities. Being there was simply about being there no matter what. The pup made that soft whining sound again, and this time Thomas heard something in it that he had not noticed before. It was not just a sound of distress or anxiety. It was a song, a lullaby perhaps, or a promise. I am here. I will not leave. You are not alone. Thomas felt tears prick at his eyes and looked away, embarrassed by his own emotion. But when he looked back, he saw Elena watching him with an expression of understanding. Animals have a way of teaching us things, she said softly, things we thought we already knew. Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. As evening fell, Elena finally stepped back from the table and removed her gloves. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a cautious hope in her eyes. It is stable, she said, not out of danger, but stable. The next 24 hours will tell us whether it is going to survive. Thomas felt a tension he had not realized he was holding begin to release from his shoulders. What does it need now? Warmth, rest, and continued fluids. I will stay here tonight to monitor it. You should go home and get some sleep. I'm not going anywhere. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. There's a couch in the waiting room. I will bring some blankets. Thomas settled onto the worn couch with Chief at his feet. The healthier pup, which Thomas had started calling Scout in his mind, curled up beside the German Shepherd. The three of them formed a tight cluster of warmth and watchfulness. He had almost drifted off to sleep when he heard a soft knock on the clinic door. Thomas rose quietly and moved to the window. A woman stood outside, tall and professional looking, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was wearing the distinctive uniform of the Montana Department of Fish Wildlife and Parks. He opened the door. Officer Reed, the woman said. I am Dr. Margaret Shun, wildlife biologist with the department. I know Captain Morrison said we would be here tomorrow, but I heard about the situation and wanted to assess it myself. Thomas felt his defenses rise. The pups are not ready to be transported. I am not here to transport them, Dr. Chun said calmly. I am here to evaluate the situation and make recommendations. May I come in? Thomas hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. Dr. Chun moved through the clinic with quiet efficiency, examining the pup on the profound that it felt almost sacred. I am sure, Thomas thought. I am more sure than I have been about anything in 3 years. The pup jumped into the car, settling beside its brother, and Chief Thomas closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's seat. He started the engine and felt the heater begin to push warm air into the cabin. He picked up his radio, hesitated, then set it back down. Protocol could wait right now. There was a pup dying in his back seat, and the only person who might be able to save it was 45 minutes away in a small town called Darby. Thomas put the car in drive and pulled away from the forest, leaving behind the frozen body of a mother wolf and carrying with him two small eyes that depended entirely on what he did next in the rearview mirror. He could see Chief lying with the two pups pressed against his body. The healthier pup had its head resting on Chief's front leg, its golden eyes finally closed in exhausted sleep. It had been waiting for 5 days. It had done everything it could do. Now it was Thomas's turn. He pressed the accelerator, and the car surged forward, racing against time itself. The morning sun continued to rise over the Montana mountains, indifferent to the small drama unfolding beneath it. But for Thomas Reed, everything had changed. He was no longer just driving to work. He was driving towards something he had been running from for 3 years, and he was not going to stop until he reached it. The veterinary clinic in Darby was a modest building that sat at the edge of town, its faded blue paint and weathered sign suggesting years of faithful service to the community. Dr. Elena Vasquez had opened the clinic 15 years ago, and in that time she had treated everything from prize-winning horses to stray cats found in garbage bins. But she had never treated a wolf. Thomas pulled into the small parking lot and killed the engine through the windshield. He could see Elena's pickup truck already parked near the entrance. Good, she was here. He opened the back door of his patrol car and carefully lifted the bundled pup from the seat. The small creature had not moved during the entire drive, and Thomas could feel its heartbeat growing fainter against his chest. Time was running out. Chief jumped out of the car and immediately took a position beside Thomas. The healthier pup followed, staying close to the German Shepherd, as if it had already accepted the dog as a substitute guardian. Together, the four of them walked toward the clinic's entrance. Elena met them at the door. She was a woman in her mid-40s with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. But when she saw what Thomas was carrying, those eyes widened. Thomas, she said, her voice carrying a warning tone. What have you done? I need your help. Thomas replied simply, that is a wolf, a wild wolf. You know, I am not licensed to treat wild animals. I know, I'm asking anyway. Elena looked at the bundle in his arms, then at Chief, then at the other pup standing beside the German Shepherd. Her professional composure cracked slightly when she saw the way the healthier pup was pressed against Chief's leg, seeking comfort from an animal that should have been its natural enemy. Come inside, she said finally, but I want you to know that I am doing this against my better judgment. The examination room was small, but clean, equipped with everything necessary to treat the domestic animals of Darby and the surrounding ranches. Elena cleared the metal table and gestured for Thomas to place the pup on it. When Thomas unwrapped his jacket, both he and Elena drew sharp breaths. The pup was in worse condition than either of them had realized. Its fur was matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Its eyes were closed and sunk in the skin around them, pulled tight from dehydration. Every bone in its small body was visible beneath the dull coat. How long has it been like this? Elena asked, already reaching for her stethoscope. I do not know exactly. The mother has been dead for at least 4 or 5 days. I think this one stopped eating after she died. Elena listened to the pup's heart, then checked its temperature and examined its gums. Her expression grew more serious with each assessment. Severe dehydration, she said. Possible hypothermia despite your body heat during transport. Definite malnutrition. Thomas, this animal is dying. Can you save it? Elena was quiet for a long moment in the corner of the room. Chief had positioned himself near the door with the other pup. Beside him, the healthier pup was watching the examination with intense focus, its golden eyes never leaving its sibling on the table. I can try, Elena said finally, but you need to understand something. Even if I stabilize this pup, it is a wild animal. The Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks will need to be notified. There are protocols. I know about protocols. Thomas said, his voice was harder than he intended. Protocol says I should have left these pups in the forest. Protocol says I should have called it in and waited for wildlife services to arrive sometime tomorrow. By tomorrow, this pup would be dead. Elena looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. They had known each other for 15 years, ever since Thomas had brought Chief to her clinic as a nervous young dog fresh from training. She had seen Thomas at his best, and at his worst. She had been one of the few people who noticed when he started to change after Kevin died, even though he never told her why. Why does this matter so much to you? She asked quietly. Thomas did not answer. Immediately, he looked at the dying pup on the table, then at the healthier pup watching from the corner. He thought about the road, the waiting, the days and days of hope that refused to die. Because that one, he said, pointing to the healthier pup, spent 5 days waiting on a frozen road for someone to help it walk to that road every morning and sat there until sunset. It kept its brother alive through freezing. Nights it did everything it possibly could. Elena followed his gaze to the pup in the corner. The small wolf met her eyes without flinching, and something in that golden stare made her breath catch. 5 days, she repeated at least. Elena turned back to the pup on the table and began preparing in 4-line. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but there was a new determination in her movements. I need warm saline solution, glucose, and probably antibiotics. She said, this is going to take several hours. You should call whoever you need to call. Thomas pulled out his phone and stared at it. He had to report this. He knew he had to report this. Captain Harold Morrison was probably already wondering why Thomas had not checked in for his morning rounds. He dialed the number. Morrison answered on the second ring. Read, "Where the hell are you? Dispatch says you have been off the grid for 2 hours." Thomas took a deep breath. "Captain, I found something during my patrol. 2 wolf pups, orphan. The mother is dead. One of the pups is in critical condition." There's a long pause on the other end of the line. "Where are these pups now?" "I brought them to Dr. Vasquez's clinic in Darby. The smaller one needed immediate medical attention." Morrison's voice went cold. "You brought wild wolves to a domestic animal clinic." Reed, "Do you have any idea how many regulations you have violated this morning?" "Yes, sir. I do. Fish wildlife and parks has jurisdiction over wild animals. You should have secured the scene and called it in. That is protocol." What he found inside the shelter was not what he expected. There was another pup. This one was also black, but smaller than the first, much smaller. It lay curled in a tight ball in the deepest corner of the shelter, its fur dull and matted, its breathing shallow and rapid. Even from several feet away, Thomas could see the way its ribs protruded beneath its skin. This pup was starving. This pup was dying. The first pup, the one who had been waiting on the road, walked past Thomas and curled up next to its sibling. It began to lick the smaller pup's face with gentle, persistent strokes, as if trying to warm it back to life through sheer force of will. Thomas understood everything in that moment. This pup had not been lost. It had not been abandoned. It had been waiting. Every morning it had walked to that road and sat in the middle of the frozen dirt waiting for someone to pass by, waiting for someone who could help. And every evening, when no one came, it had returned to this shelter to spend another night, keeping its dying brother alive. How many days had it done this? How many mornings had it walked to that road, full of hope, only to return at sunset with that hope diminishing? Thomas did not know, but he knew that today, finally, the waiting had ended. Chief moved before Thomas could react. The German shepherd walked into the shelter and lay down beside the 2 wolf pups, positioning his body to provide warmth. The smaller pup, who should have been terrified of this much larger predator, instead pressed itself against Chief's fur with a shuddering sigh of relief. It was as if it understood on some instinctive level that this dog meant safety. Thomas watched this scene unfold and felt something crack open in his chest. It was a feeling he had been running from for 3 years, a feeling he had buried so deep that he thought it could never surface again. But here in this frozen forest, watching a German shepherd protect 2 orphan wolves, the feeling rose up like a wave and threatened to drown him. He thought about Kevin. His younger brother had been the weak one in their family, though Thomas would never have used that word out loud. Kevin was sensitive, where Thomas was tough, uncertain, where Thomas was confident. Kevin had always needed protection, and Thomas had always provided it. That was their dynamic. That was who they were until 3 years ago. Kevin had called on a Thursday night, his voice carrying that particular tone that Thomas had learned to recognize over 40 years of brotherhood. Something was wrong. Kevin needed to talk, but Thomas was in the middle of a major operation, coordinating search teams across 3 counties. He told Kevin he would call back. He never did. 2 weeks later, Kevin was dead, a heart attack, alone in his apartment. The doctor said that if someone had been with him, if someone had called for help immediately, he would have survived. But no one was there. No one was ever there. Thomas had not spoken about this to anyone, not to his ex-wife, not to his colleagues, not even to Chief. He had simply absorbed the guilt like a sponge absorbing water, letting it saturate every fiber of his being until it became indistinguishable from who he was. He was the man who had not returned his brother's call. He was the man who had chosen work over family. He was the man who had failed And now, in this frozen shelter, he was watching a pup who had done everything he had not this small creature barely 3 months. Old had refused to abandon its sibling. It had walked to that road. Every morning, day after day, in temperatures that would have killed most animals, it had kept its brother warm through freezing nights. It had done everything in its power to save the one it loved. Thomas pulled out his phone and checked the signal 2 bars enough to make a call. His finger hovered over his supervisor's number, ready to report the situation and request wildlife services, but he did not press the button. Instead, he looked at the 3 animals huddled together in the shelter. Chief had positioned himself so that both wolf pups were pressed against his body, sharing his warmth. The healthier pup had stopped licking its brother and was now watching Thomas with those golden eyes, waiting to see what this human would do. Thomas made a decision. He shrugged off his patrol jacket and carefully wrapped it around the smaller pup, creating a bundle that he could carry against his chest. The pup was so light that it almost felt like holding nothing at all, just fur and bones and a heartbeat that was growing weaker by the minute. The first pup watched this with intense focus. When Thomas began to walk back toward the road, it fell in a step beside him. Chief followed behind, and together they formed a strange procession through the snow-covered forest. A police officer, a German shepherd, and a wolf pup, all united by a single purpose. They were halfway back to the car when Thomas realized something that made him stop in his tracks. He had been so focused on the shelter and the dying pup that he had not looked around. He had not searched the area. He had not done what 28 years of training had taught him to do. He handed the bundled pup to Chief, who took the jacket's edge gently in his mouth and held it with surprising delicacy. Then Thomas walked back toward the shelter, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. With renewed attention, he found her about 50 yards away in a small depression between 2 fallen trees. The mother wolf, she was beautiful even in death. Her fur was the same midnight black as her pups, with silver highlights around her muzzle that suggested she had been older, more experienced. She lay on her side with her legs stretched out, as if she had simply decided to rest and never woken up. There were no signs of violence, no gunshot wounds, no trap marks, no evidence of human interference. Or death had been natural, probably an infection from an old injury that had slowly poisoned her system until her body could no longer fight. These things happened in the wild. Nature was not kind, and it was not fair. Thomas estimated that she had been dead for 4 or 5 days, long enough for her body to freeze solid in the Montana winter, long enough for her pups to understand that she was not coming back, long enough for the stronger pup to make a choice that would define everything. He walked back to where Chief waited with the dying pup. The healthier pup was sitting beside them, its eyes now fixed on the direction from which Thomas had come. It knew, it had always known, but it had chosen to focus on what it could save rather than what it had already lost. Thomas picked up the bundled pup and continued walking toward the road. When they emerged from the forest, the sun had risen higher, warming the frozen landscape with pale winter light. His patrol car waited exactly where he had left it, a reminder of the world he was about to re-enter. He opened the back door and placed the bundled pup on the seat. Chief jumped in beside it, immediately resuming his protective position. The healthier pup hesitated at the open door, looking up at Thomas with an expression that seemed to ask a question. Thomas knelt down so that he was at eye level with the small wolf. They studied each other for a long moment. Human and animal, 2 different species, connected by something that neither could fully understand. "Are you sure?" the pup's eyes seemed to ask. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Thomas reached out his hand, palm up, offering, but not demanding. The pup sniffed his fingers delicately, then did something remarkable. It pressed its small, cold nose against Thomas's palm and held it there, a gesture of trust. So the morning sun hung low over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and amber. It was the kind of light that made everything feel sacred, the kind that turned ordinary moments into something worth remembering. Officer Thomas Reed had seen thousands of mornings like this one during his 28 years with the K-9 unit, but he had never learned to take them for granted. If you believe that animals can change human lives in ways we never expect, then you are in the right place. Subscribe to Wild Heart Stories and join our community dedicated to celebrating the extraordinary bonds of the animal kingdom. Every new subscriber helps us share more stories like this one. Thomas guided his patrol car along the familiar dirt road that wound through the Bitterroot National Forest. A route was etched into his memory like the lines on his own hands. He knew every curve, every dip, every place where the road narrowed between ancient pines. He had driven this path at least once. 1,000 times, maybe more. It was the kind of routine that could lull a man into complacency if he let it. But today something was different, Chief. Sensed at first, the 8-year-old German Shepherd sat in his usual position in the back seat, separated from Thomas by a metal grate, but nothing could separate the bond they had built over nearly a decade of partnership. Thomas had trained dozens of dogs in his career, had worked with some of the finest animals the department had ever seen, but Chief was different. Chief was not just a partner, he was family. The dog began to shift restlessly, his dark brown eyes fixed on something ahead that Thomas could not yet see. A low whine escaped his throat, a sound Thomas had never heard from him before in 8 years. Chief had barked at suspects, growled at threats, howled during the long nights of search operations, but he had never whined, not once. Thomas slowed the car, his instincts sharpening. After nearly 3 decades in law enforcement, he had learned to trust the signals that most people ignored: the hair rising on the back of his neck, the subtle change in atmosphere that preceded something significant, and most importantly, the behavior of his dog. That was when he saw it. A small black shape sat in the middle of the road, perhaps 30 yards ahead. At first, Thomas thought it might be a rock, or perhaps a piece of debris blown in by the wind. But rocks did not move, and this shape was definitely moving. It was a pup, a wolf pup, no more than 3 months old, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that caught the morning light like chips of amber gold. The pup was sitting in the exact center of the road, positioned as if it had chosen that spot with deliberate intention. It was not running, it was not hiding, it was waiting. Thomas brought the car to a complete stop and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, he could hear Chief's breathing grow heavier, more urgent. The German Shepherd pressed his nose against the grate, his entire body trembling with an emotion. Thomas could not quite identify. Protocol was clear in situations like this. Wild animals, especially wolves, were to be reported to the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Officers were not to approach, not to interact, not to interfere with nature's course. Thomas had followed protocol his entire career. It was what made him good at his job. It was what had kept him alive, but protocol had never accounted for the look in that pup's eyes. Thomas opened his door slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The cold air hit his face, immediately carrying the sharp scent of pine and snow. He stepped out onto the frozen road, his boots crunching against the thin layer of ice that covered everything. The pup did not move. Behind him, Chief began to bark, not the aggressive warning bark he used for suspects, and not the excited bark he used when tracking a scent. This was something else entirely. It was almost pleading, as if the dog was trying to tell Thomas something that words could never express. Thomas approached slowly, covering the 30 yards in small measured steps. With each step, he expected the pup to bolt. That was what wild animals did. They sensed danger, and they fled. It was the most basic survival instinct hardwired into their DNA over millions of years of evolution. But this pup defied every expectation. When Thomas was 10 feet away, he stopped. The pup watched him with those impossible golden eyes, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The wind whispered through the pine. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. The world held its breath, and the pup stood up. It was a small movement, just a shift from sitting to standing, but it carried the weight of intention. The pup took 2 steps toward Thomas, then stopped. It looked at him, then turned its head toward the forest on the right side of the road. Then it looked back at Thomas. It was asking him to follow. Thomas had seen dogs communicate with their handlers thousands of times. He'd seen Chief indicate the presence of drugs, weapons, and missing persons with subtle shifts in body language that most people would never notice, but he had never seen a wild animal communicate so clearly, so deliberately with a human being. The pup began to walk toward the tree line, pausing every few steps to look back over its shoulder. Its message was unmistakable: come with me. I need you to see something. Thomas made a decision that violated every protocol he had ever followed. He returned to the car and opened the back door. Chief bounded out. Immediately, his training momentarily forgotten in the urgency of whatever he was sensing, the German Shepherd did not chase the pup or show any sign of aggression. Instead, he fell in a step beside Thomas, his body pressed against his partner's leg in a gesture of solidarity. Together, the 3 of them entered the forest. The pup led them through snow that reached Thomas's knees, in places navigating between trees and over fallen logs with the sure-footed grace of an animal born To this environment, Thomas struggled to keep up his 52-year-old body, protesting the unexpected exertion. But he did not stop. He could not stop something in the way. The pup moved. The purpose in its small body made stopping impossible. They walked for 15 minutes, maybe more. Thomas lost track of time in the white silence of the forest. The only sounds were his own labored breathing, Chief's panting, and the soft crunch of snow beneath 3 sets of feet. Then the pup stopped. They had reached a small clearing where a collection of large rocks formed a natural shelter. The rocks were covered in moss and ice, creating a cave-like structure that was barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. It was the kind of place that nature provided for its most vulnerable creatures, a refuge from the wind and the cold and the countless dangers of the wild. The pup sat down at the entrance of this shelter and looked at Thomas with those golden eyes. Its message was clear: this is what I needed you to see. Thomas approached the rocky shelter carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. He had a terrible feeling that he knew what he was going to find. Orphan pups usually meant a dead mother nearby, killed by hunters or disease, or simply the cruel mathematics